Okay, ninth bio, welcome to part two of the intro week with how we're actually going to conduct and do this science. This is a little bit, philosophical in terms of what we're doing in this class, but also it will have some practical aspects to it where when we go into lab, and we will go into lab, we do a lot of lab work. You will know exactly what I expect of you and what I want you to do. So, this is high school, and I take lab very seriously. I hope the last year, I guess you had maybe Sanford or Kunith or something like that. They took labs seriously, but you will find with me in this school that lab is not something that we do on the side. Lab is something that is very, very central and very crucial to your learning in this class, and you'll get a sense of how much we're in lab. We'll probably be in lab every week, depending on the nature of the lab and how long it takes. And so, anyway, this is about observing, hypothesizing, and we'll have to define those terms as we go. But today I want to give you the reasoning for it and what methods that biologists are going to use when they conduct a test, an experiment, basically. Okay, so put that in your notes. This is our habit with note taking. You can put today's date in your notes and write down that title, observing and hypothesizing, and then everything that we're going to talk about will go in there. So again, you're going to have this video. I'll leave it up for a while so you can watch it a couple times or whatever if you need to, or go back to find the aspects that you missed while I was presenting. And so you'll have this available to you. But take good notes so that, like I said before, we can get off on the right foot and have a good foundation. So the actual term biology comes from the Greek. A lot in this class comes from Greek, not Latin. I don't speak a lick of Latin at all, but I do speak Greek and Hebrew. And so biology comes from bios and logos, and that is what the Greek looks like. And so bios just means life, right? It's pretty easy. And logos is the logic or the expression or the study or the knowledge or the quote unquote word, what's spoken about it. And so biology is the study of life. It's the science of life. If you want to be really weird about it, you could say biology is the word of life. It is what we know and what we express about living things and natural phenomena on this planet. So, there are only two questions that we'll ever ask in this year. Just two questions. Now, they can be broken down into various versions of these questions and applied differently, but essentially, gang, these are the two questions that we ask all year. Why does this living thing possess these features? Now, we don't know what features we're talking about if we're dissecting a frog or looking at a dinosaur skeleton or cell organelles or anything like that, but we want to know, why does it have this? And that may not seem like a very exciting question to you until I tell you, when we get into cell theory, we're going to learn that mitochondria have different DNA of their own than your own cell. It's almost like you have one living thing living inside of another living thing. And if you don't know what mitochondria are, do not say powerhouse of the cell. But they make ATP, and ATP is the only fuel you run on. And so my point is, the only way to keep you going is by the productivity of a creature that lives inside your cells that's not your own. So what are they doing there? How'd they get there? It's an amazing question. And then, whatever that thing is, how does it work? Like, how does it actually do what it's supposed to do? Is it biomechanical? Does it use physics? Is it chemical? Is the thing alive itself? And so we want to understand how it actually works. How does natural selection work? How does DNA expression work physically to make an actual flesh and blood organism? And so it's fun. It's fun. Sometimes in biology, we walk up to living creatures, and basically the question is, what are you and where did you come from and how did you get here? But they all go under these kind of two questions of why does it possess these features and how does it work? And so that's what we were interested in all year. Biology gets really strange when we start talking about emergent properties, and so I show you this picture of these archways as an example. The shaded, the dark gray areas are triangles, of course. They're very particular shapes. Some are semicircular and some are flat, but the triangles were not intended. They arise from the very particular structures of the dome or the archways, these architectural features. The triangles are an emergent property, something that happens because of something else that was not planned, not intended. I'm not saying it's chaos or accidental. I'm just telling you that, if we create two archways in a circle in the ceiling, or every time we make an archway, we get a triangle. That's kind of an interesting phenomena that happens because of other things. And that's really what you need to understand about life. You structure one, two, three things maybe, but those one, two, three things will give rise to four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 things that weren't a direct aim, but were emergent properties, and they are complicated and very cool. So when it comes to life, this is where I'm telling you, the more you zoom in, the more complex it becomes. And complexity is such an amazing phenomena for us to talk about as we get into it. So let's have some fun. Take a look at this picture. Write down in your notes right now, prepare to discuss tomorrow. How would you begin to describe this behavior? Just go for it. Describe it any way you want. I'm still here. I'm just being quiet, and I want you to write something down. The turtle is fill in the blank. Describe him or her, I guess, but describe. So what'd you say? I have some students say he's excited, he's scared, he's saying goal, he's super happy, he's whatever. And usually what they use to describe this turtle are emotions. I have no idea what emotions that turtle is experiencing, but here's how I would describe the behavior. The flippers are up above the head, the eyes are pointed forward, the mouth is open. I don't know if that's mating behavior, feeding behavior, defensive behavior. I don't know enough about this turtle, but I know that's what he's doing. Now, what it means is another question. So we can observe and then we can interpret, and you've got to be careful between the two. My experience has been most students rush to interpret, they're not observing. So slow down just a half sec and write down and list how would you begin to describe this behavior? What are you seeing there? And then we can interpret later. Okay, so that's how we begin to describe this. The big word for that, which we'll discuss in our chat time, is anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism. Anthro means man, pro means to, and morph means to change, right? Anthropomorphism. And the word doesn't make sense at first when it's like, what, man to change or change to man? What it means is you take human traits and you apply them to a non-human setting or creature, and it doesn't work. We'll do a roly-poly lab as soon as you get back, hopefully, and we'll watch their behavior, and some of you will say stuff like, oh, they're totally freaking out, or they're scared, or, oh, look at them, they're in love with each other, and we don't know what they're doing in terms of what that means. We just know the way they're acting, and like if they're moving to the left, they're moving to the right, they're being still, something like that. So I think you get the idea. But slow down and actually just describe the behavior. Don't interpret and don't project human qualities onto something that's not human. What's this? Looks like some kind of mer horse. It's a seahorse, right? Now, that's not like any seahorse I've ever seen. That's what a seahorse looks like, right? So here's another problem in observations. This was before cameras, and some naturalists went out and saw a seahorse, I'm sure, and like he saw that and came back and wanted to describe it to the artist. So the artist said, so, what did it look like? Well, it's like a little fish, all right? It lived in water, all right? It had the head like a horse, cool. It had a curly tail. Had a curly tail. And the artist says, okay. And you said you saw it in the water. Did it have any? Did it have any fins? Did it have any flippers? And the scientist, I guess, said, yeah, it had little ones. You know, what the scientist failed to do is say the fins were on the back or the dorsal side. So since you started this artist off with the idea of a horse, they just put the little flippers up front where the hooves go. And so you have to be careful in the way you observe with your words, how you describe it, so that we get the right picture. And so hopefully I'll have some exercises for you online, or we can practice that when you get back, one of the two. But we want to work on observations and how we actually write things down in our notes. Okay. So in your notes, go ahead and put these two columns, right? We're talking about data collection, so that when we go into lab and I tell you, make observations, you know what I want you to do. I want you to make quantitative and qualitative observations, and I want you to know the difference between the two. Now, something that's not on here is compare and contrast. So compare means to see how they are alike, and contrast means to see how they are different. So when we go into lab and we've got this thing set up, whatever it is, and I say, all right, ninth grade, make observations, your brain should immediately, without me saying, compare, contrast, and then get quantitative and qualitative observations. And so in your notes, go ahead and jot down these list of observations that we make on either side. So quantitative sounds like quantity, and it has to do with numbers. And my goodness, count bumps, measure lines, anything that you can graph or chart. Stick a thermometer in there, say it's 3-to-1 ratio, it's 75%, covered in mud. I don't know, but some things will be estimates, and that's okay. But anything you can do to give me a measurement is fine. You could even say 30 paces, like how they measure horses, 5 hands, trying to get a basic idea of some measurements. And then there's qualitative observations that have to do with qualities, attributes. And so these could be visual observations that you're making, like they ran fast. You're not giving any numbers. They ran fast, they moved slow, they were wide, they were narrow. And so you could orally speak it, you could write that down, you could record it, like sound recordings. You can describe what's happening, the sky lit up, the behaviors of creatures. You can draw, you can sketch, you can photo, and then as I just said, you can record, either audio or video or both. And so these are all qualitative observations, and they are significant and important, but you always want to do both, quantitative and qualitative. So I'm going to move forward here, and you can come back and refer to this to make sure you have it in your notes. So go ahead and write down that top sentence in your notes. Biologists study the interactions of life. Life is full of interactions. Life seems to be built on a phenomena of cooperation, not really competition. There is a little bit of head-to-head competition in a few different areas, but most of it is off of things like symbiosis and mutualism, partnerships, packs, herds, you name it. And so biologists study the interactions of life. Living things do not exist in isolation. And if that's true, what does that mean for humans, modern humans? We are so shocked by disease and group behavior. Humans do not exist in isolation, and we treat the environment like we're above it or outside of it. And we're going to find out, and we have found out very quickly this year, we are absolutely embedded in the environment. So what does this mean for our living? If we are a part of all these interactions and not isolated from them, does that change how we live? Does that alter how we think? I think so. So biologists study the interactions of life. One of the things that'll be in your book, I think, is about leafcutter ants. They carry these leaves away and they grow fungus, and they farm basically for themselves. And there's another one, the acacia tree, who has some ants, and it provides little sugar packets for them, and they defend the tree. And so there's all kinds of cool interactions out there. And we'll talk about even interactions in your own microbiome, inside your gut, inside your stomach. Biologists, write this down, study the diversity of life. Life is full of diversity, almost overdone. We don't need this much diversity. Everything could just be bacteria, but we have a history of diversity and current diversity, which is off the charts into the millions of types of organisms. And so diversity seems to be a property of life. Life seems to diversify on its own. And yes, I'm referring to evolution here, but it seems to be a basic principle of life that life does not stay the same all the time everywhere. It seems to push into as many different forms as it can, which is really, really interesting. Do you remember from middle school the characteristics of living things? Now, no description, no list is really going to be that satisfying, but here's the ones you should have learned in middle school. They have orderly structure, they grow and develop, they produce offspring, adjust to changes in the environment. Again, this is not that satisfying, but this is what's in the book. Notice what's not being said. They all are composed of cells, they have DNA, so there's lots that's not being said. But let's go ahead and jot these down. At least maybe this gives us a springboard, a starting point for our discussions of trying to figure out what life is. And we study life by studying living organisms. We don't just study life as an abstract concept. We actually have to study concrete, flesh and blood, living things to know what life is. So as my students, I'm telling you, you can't just say sentences and make claims about life. You have to get your understanding of life from actual living things. If they do something, then you need to deal with that. If they don't do something, then that's not a part of your understanding. So that's what we mean by the science of life. All right, and so here's the end. Here are some questions from your book. I think, yeah, it's from your book, the first couple chapters here that we're reading, that I want you to be prepared to answer. And these are really, really important. Not just for our discussion, but these are ones that I want to focus on. And I think when we're probably done with the unit, these are questions that I want to make sure that you can answer, wink, wink, right, on a piece of paper that's really important. But so every now and then we'll kind of converge that things that are important to me, that are important for your brain, they also, I'll reward you. I'll put them on a piece of paper and throw points your way. But understand the difference that I care about your learning more than about your grades, but we'll give you some grades too. So write these down. You should have already answered them or are about to answer them from your textbook, so they might be in your notes already. It just depends on how we're timing this with this remote learning. But know that I want to focus on these questions when we have our discussion times online. I will call on some of you to answer these. And so be prepared. Always be prepared. This is not my first rodeo. I've done this now for 9 years. And so I want you to be ready to talk to me about these things. You don't got to sound super smart. You don't got to give me an essay or anything like that. I just want you to put some thought to it and be ready to talk to me. All right, there's part 2.